A staple of anchors in the climbing world is the pre-distributed anchor. I'm using the word pre-distributed rather than pre-equalized because now we've really come to understand that equalization, even though we taught it for years, is really a myth. And so for years, we've taught students and others that we should try to equalize the anchor points in our anchor. And now with recent studies and research, we've really come to understand that it's really very hard to do or even impossible to really equalize the two anchor points. So hence the movement now is to use the word distributed. I'll be sharing a link on Canvas to a great video that really helps show why that equalization is so difficult. So now, and it's still a little cumbersome for me using this term pre-distributed versus pre-equalized. But a real standard way to build this pre-distributed anchor is using a sling. Nylon sling here is what I've got. It's a double length, meaning I have to double it to put it over my shoulder, okay? As opposed to a shoulder length sling here like this white sling I have. It's also very preferable to use nylon. So this black sling I have is almost exclusively nylon. It appears to have a little bit of Dyneema or Spectra in it, that material that hopefully you're familiar with. It's great material, super strong, stronger than steel by weight, but it's very static and it really is much more weakened by knots compared to nylon. This white sling here, I can tell is Dyneema, or I think Black Diamond calls their material Dynex. Those materials don't take dye, so we can always tell if the slings that we're using have Dyneema or Spectra in them. So here I have a nylon sling that I'm going to use, and so I'm going to be in the habit, as always, of clipping that sewn bar tack stitching up close to the carabiner, and then I can pull up another bite and clip it from the other carabiner, and then I'm going to pull my master point in the anticipated direction of load, where I anticipate my climber loading the anchor, okay, and then I'm going to pull it up and tie an overhand knot. I'm trying to tie this as clean as possible, okay. I can also tie a figure eight. I might tie an overhand just because it takes less material and a little quicker to tie, or I might choose to tie a figure eight because it actually takes more material, so it'll get my master point up a little bit higher. Notice here that I'm trying to tie it nice and clean, and this is a really key way if you're worried about this knot getting really welded in there and hard to untie later. By tying it really clean and smooth, it'll be easier to untie. You can also use the trick where you put a carabiner in this knot. So you put a carabiner in there, okay, and then cinch it down, and then when you're done loading it, you can unclip it, and you've got a little bit of space in there now to help free up that knot. It's really key if you do that, though, to use a key lock nosed carabiner. And so notice the smooth nose here. They call it a key lock because of the shape of the nose. A lot of modern carabiners now are using that key lock nose. I had a hard time today finding a traditional carabiner that has the hooded nose. So here's a hooded nose carabiner. You can see this is how original carabiners are made, where there was a pin in the gate, or in this case the wire would fit into that little notch in the nose there, and that actually helps give it some strength, because without that it's a lot easier to break the carabiner. So these are going to snag a lot easier. If you try to use one of those, it's going to get stuck in there a lot easier, and that's really the reason that people have gone to key locks, is they make it a lot easier to unclip from slings, from bolts, etc., making your job maybe a little bit easier. So here's a pre-distributed anchor using a sling. Some pros and cons here, some things to consider. Here I do have my two carabiners up on the anchor with the gates opposite each other. I did just use non-lockers. I could use locking carabiners to add a little security. I could also maybe not have to worry about them being opposed, that if I'm worried about this gate coming in contact with the rock, it's more important just to make sure that that gate is not going to interfere with the rock in some way to cause that gate to come open. Some pros and cons to think about here is I've got a master point. I also have a shelf, so it gives me some versatility, so I can clip into these two upper strands of the anchor as well as the master point. that can have some helpful applications in self-rescue. It's very redundant, okay? So if this were to saw on the rock and get cut or maybe come unclipped, I've still got this redundancy because of the knot in there, okay? It's pretty efficient, pretty quick and easy to make with just one sling that doesn't take up a lot of room in your harness. It's got a nice small angle in here. There's really no extension to the master point if one point were to fail. And as always, they should have solid anchor points. This anchor, though, maybe its limitation is that it doesn't distribute the load as effectively, right? So you can see here, as soon as I start to move in either direction, you start to see a little bit of slack, right? So if you do have a load that's going to be moving, like you got a climber climbing and maybe they're going side to side, it's going to be harder to maintain that good distribution that we're looking for. You can also make this with a cordelette, okay? So here I can use my 7mm cord. I've already tied it into a loop with a flat overhand, or you could tie it into a loop with a knot of your choosing. I'm going to put that knot right up next to the carabiner, not on the carabiner because that's going to make it more easily roll, but just next to it. And then here, just like I did with the sling, clip in two parts of it, pull it in that direction where you anticipate the load, and then tie either a figure 8 or an overhand. Okay, here you can see that there's actually a lot of material here. And if I want to get my anchor point, my master point up higher, I've got some different options. One, I could double the material from the beginning, like so. Okay, same thing, pulled in the direction of load. Here you can see I'm having a harder time tying this knot because there's a lot of material now going through that knot. Okay, if I don't want to fight with that, or if I want my master point lower, another option is to do this, is to clip it like I did, and then instead of doubling it here, just to clip an extra loop of material up here. Now if I'm going to clip this extra loop, notice here it's essentially like I have 3 strands now. I want that extra loop on the knot side. The knot is always going to be a weakness, and so this extra loop then that's going to get isolated once I tie the knot in there, it's better to have that on the knot side than over here because it just helps like add a little security to the side that's got the knot in there. And now I can tie it and you can see where my master point ends up. So 2 different ways to tie that pre-distributed anchor, some pros and cons there. Again, this is a staple of the climbing world, certainly a great anchor to use in many situations.